Umar, your video is not very clear. Somewhat dark.
Okay. Good morning, Professor Tabriz. Good morning, my colleague Umar, and good morning to all the participants who are here. My task assigned by my colleague Umar is to introduce our small organization, Legal Academia. And I guess Professor Tabriz know about the organization because he was part of it in the initial days. But then, when we had presence in WhatsApp only. Legal Academia is an informal initiative started by us, myself, Umar, and a few others. And now during lockdown, we have extended to the Facebook as well. And of course, in the future, we are planning to formalize this organization with the objective of bringing quality in legal education, as all of us envisage. And we also we are planning our first publication, like about the most prominent legal academics in India. And we plan to select the names through a democratic means. And then we also have plans to organize workshops and seminars in large scale. But of course, all of us are busy with our own the commitment towards our own organization. So we are not in a hurry. We are going slow, but slow and steady. That is our mantra. And before we begin our today's lecture, and before I hand over the stage to my colleague Kumar, um, uh, let me all wish you a very happy Independence Day. Today is August 15th, and this is a proud moment, proud day for all of us. And thank you, everyone. Umar, please introduce our esteemed speaker.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Vishnu, and happy Independence Day to everyone over here. This is a very special occasion, although some of us are occupied in our online programs on Independence Day, so that is another matter that some of us are busy. But yes, I really thank everyone who has joined in till now, and I'm sure will be joining in eventually. It is my extreme privilege to introduce the speaker for today, Professor Dr. Tabriz Ahmed. And I think perhaps he is one personality who has the best kind of a profile that anyone could think of when it comes to the term, when it is about the achievements and the kind of work and his contributions in the academia. Well, Professor Tabriz is a PhD from Aligarh Muslim University in cyber law and IPR. And perhaps he did his PhD in cyber law and IPR in those times when cyber law and IPR were not very cliched areas of law. They did not develop as much as areas of law in India, and still he took up that challenge and did a PhD in that. And currently he is serving as the Pro Vice Chancellor of the GD Goenka University. And he's also the Dean of School of Law over there. He's the founder president of Technolex, which is an online platform of this discussion regarding the technology and the law. And he is also the national vice president of the International Council of Jurists London and chair legal education section of Indian National Bar Association. Professor Tabriz has the distinction of being the founding members of one of the best leading private law schools in India. For example, He was the founding director of Alliance Law School and also the founding professor of the KIT Law School in Odisha. And he was also the mentor at TBI, NSTDB at Government of India. So he was also the founding faculty at NUJS Kolkata. So a lot of base making has been done by Professor Tabrez. He's a prolific speaker in areas like cyber law, IPR, and energy law. He has more than 100 publications in reputed journals to his name, and he has been a keynote speaker in more than 100 prestigious international conferences held at places like US, UK, China, Japan, UAE, Egypt, Singapore, etc. He also happens to be the editor of extremely reputed journals like JIPR, Journal of Politics and Law of Canada, Journal of WRBR Australia. He is ranked among the top 200 law authors in the world by SSRN, and he has been awarded the best keynote speaker by IPR Gorilla USA, and the same organization also awarded him the tag of top 50 IP players in the world. So I'm sure that the kind of achievements that Professor Tabrez has to his name, that befits completely the kind of topic that we are going to discuss today. And the topic for today is prospects and regulatory challenges of cybersecurity and data privacy in emerging technologies. And I'm sure that with his background that we have just come to know, and some of us already know him, we can be very sure of the fact that he is the best person to speak on this topic, especially when it has to be an academic voice from within the group of the law teachers. Professor Tabrez, I thank you very much for being here, and now I leave the floor open to you to take it further with your discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Umar, for a very generous, elaborate introduction. And also thank you to Mr. Vishnu Koniar for really running a very great organization, that is the Legal Academia, and also trying to discuss very crucial issues that is required to be discussed in detail with the faculty members. That is very good effort. So I must congratulate Mr. Vishnu and Umar for taking the initiative. Also thank all the participants being the busy day today, and also I want to wish all of you a very happy Independence Day. You found time to participate in this program. So topic for today is that cyber security. So prospects and challenges of cyber security and data privacy in the emerging technologies. So generally, this area is fully linked with the law and technology. And generally, we see law as what we felt earlier. Law is as a basis of law is the humanities. So that's why in earlier days, we were not thinking that the linkage of law with science and technology is there. So that's why most of the faculty, those who qualified earlier, they have mostly not from the science background. They are mostly from the humanities background, and they have taken the law. So most of the law faculty who are teaching right now are not fully aware what is the linkages of law and technology. In recent days, for the first time in NUJS Calcutta with Madhav Menon, we started BSc course in 2000. It was just like a mere BSc degree. Anybody can take the kind of some courses like this law and technology or environment, IPR or IT law. He can be given a degree of BSc LLB, but there's no basis for science and technology. Now, for the first time, myself, Faizan Mustafa and all, we started in this in KIT Law School, Bhubaneswar. In 2007, we designed a course with the NL Mitra, a BSc LLB program, where the basis will be the biotechnology, and then will be given the basic law plus specialized in IPR. When I joined the CAT, this UPS Dehradun, we designed a very advanced course, that is BTech LLB program, a 6-year program with a Bachelor of Computer Science Engineering and Law. So you will be given full course on the BTech Computer Science, then the Mechanical Engineering, Electrical Engineering, and then you will be having option to specialize, in fact, super specialize in the area of IPR cyber law, because you'll be taught all basic law courses plus 10 courses in either cyber or IPR. So these are very rare, and very few students are taking these courses. So currently, if you see globally, in fact, there is no course on this area in even USA and UK, other places. When I go to the foreign conferences, people highly appreciate these kind of BSLB courses, the BTLB courses, because they never thought to have these courses. So my point is that currently, globally, in the legal field, there are very, very less number of professors who understand the linkage of law and science and technology. But the way market is changing, in fact, now everything has linked to law. What we have seen in COVID period, because now everything is now governed by the cyberspace. Everybody is working from home. All the universities, colleges, until now they're working online. I don't know. Nobody is sure that when we are going to fully shift to the offline. Now the thoughts are coming with, by seeing the benefits of the cyberspace online medium. Let us work for blended model, and we can, I think in the all time to come, we have to be on online mode, or we have to deliver a lot of things online mode. Even this today's webinar, see the kinds of the saving we are doing. So everybody is sitting at their home at their comfort, and they're able to find out the kind of the great learning happening over the cyberspace without any much investment. If you see this program here going to organize in a hotel somewhere in an offline mode, the kind of traveling, the cost, and then no time, energy wasted, and the kind of benefit is coming. If you compare today, this online medium is very, very beneficial. So my point is that the way market is changing, there is great need that we have to always try to link law with science and technology, because now there's a great shift. Earlier, we used to have everything in offline mode. Now everything is shifting to online mode, whether education. Now also we are going to have the even medical, the prescription is going to be happening this online on internet. Already we have e-commerce, m-commerce. Now great shift happening in the in the COVID period for the online education. So what is happening? Everything is shifting on cyberspace. That's why now all the laws are going to be challenged, because laws were made keeping in mind in the offline mode, but now the same laws are going to be interacted and utilized in the online mode. So there will be some challenges. So every law will not be suited to the online medium. So that's why a lot of reviews are required. And we are the person as a faculty, as a researcher, we have to suggest the government of India, also at the international level, that what are the changes are required in our the current legal the position, and also current the policy changes plus future policy changes where are they required. If you see the growth of internet, it was actually it started in 1967 in USA. For the first time, the US government was worried about how to communicate in a better way, faster way with the defense. So they developed a kind of ARPANET, kind of the just like you can say intranet to communicate among the military persons, how to communicate in a better and faster way. By seeing the benefits of these communication, they started thinking, why not to use this base for the research purposes. So second then research was that how to use this technology for research, because for research purposes you have to travel in fact city to city, library to library to find the resources. And I have the real experience. Umar rightly mentioned that when I started in 1995 thinking about the cyber law, I went to my professor in AMU Aligarh. He was Dean Faculty of Law, and when I asked him, sir, can we have a cyber law course as an optional? So he was shocked. He was saying, my God, there is no law on the cyberspace. There is no acts are there, and you are telling us to start a cyber law course. How it is possible? Then I told him, sir, already because for the first time in 1995 we have seen the internet came in India. Only 3 companies were there who started the internet services. Myself, because I was from science background, I left my MSc and joined the law. So I was always worried whether my decision was okay or not. Because in my first class, in my first lecture, I was sitting in my class in 1995, and Faizan Mustafa was the person who came for the first lecture in the morning at 8:30. And he was going to teach the constitutional law. And then he started the introduction. That I was the person sitting on the front row. I always sitting on the front row. So I was sitting front row at the first person. So he started the asking questions. So he asked me that, okay, let us introduce yourself. So he asked me, okay, Mr. Tabrez, stand up, tell me. So I told I was doing, I did BSc honors, I was doing MSc. Then I thought I developed some kind of motivation to do law because I'm preparing for civil services. So I'm joined the law. Then he asked me, what was your BSc? So I told him the life sciences, zoology. So he was laughing in his own style. My God. So you are here to apply law on animals. So everybody was laughing in the class. I was worried, my God, I thought, okay, I have taken a very wrong decision to join after leaving my MSc in life science in zoology and joining the law. So from day one in my mind, I was thinking that whether I have taken a right decision, because his comment was that the law is made for humanities. and how somebody leaving MSc joining law is relevant. So you may be doing a foolish job, because for your all these knowledge of MSc may not be utilized here in this law program. So from day one, then I was fully inspired by environmental law. Then he was a person who started for the first time IPR in AMU as an optional course. I've taken IPR taught by Faizan Mustafa. Then I started developing the inclination toward the law, science and technology. Then again, when Madhav Menon seen my profile, I was working in the Anand law firm in Delhi, and then he was writing letter to all the deans. Can you nominate good faculty who can take over the my job in future as a future law teacher? So my dean faculty of law AMU, he just invited me, called me, and I was working in Anand. Can you then are you thinking to go to the academics, because your background is science? You did LLM in this IPR and cyber law, and then also your LLM in corporate law. Are you want to take up the faculty position in NUJS? Because Madhav Menon called us and he was did the recommendation. So they recommended my name. When I went for the interview, he was very happy by seeing my dissertation on cyber law at that time in 2000. So he hired me. When Parveen Anand came to know that I was hired by him, he was very happy. He was saying that my law firms are always open for you. If Madhav Menon is taking you as a founding faculty of NUJS, he is experimenting law, science and technology, he is focusing on IPR, you should go. So I joined there. So my paper given to me for teaching was science and technology in NUJS Calcutta at the first batch in 2000. So that was journey for my kind of the linkages toward the law, science and technology. And since for the last 20 years, I'm very strongly trying to see how the law, science and technology is relevant. But even till today, there is very, very less awareness are there. Still, people are not highly appreciating that linkages of law, science and technology. But as a person of the law, science and technology, I see that every faculty now should be fully aware about the at least technology part, because not only cyber law, even cyber law has become a general kind of the discipline. It's not only linkage to one field, because every law is now going to be challenged because of cyberspace. It is not only IPR and all these things. So that's why every law teacher should be fully aware about the technology part, because now everything, every rights and liabilities may be challenged and may be violated because of the internet. That's why what I want that let me first tell all of you about the development in technology. Then I'll be coming the security part and then privacy part. So first part is technology. So I just told you that for the first time in 1967, the birth of internet taken place in the USA in the defense system. And then in 80s, we realized the importance and we use for the science and technology for the research purposes. For the first time, it was debated at the ICANN level, and there were a lot of research started from 1980s to 1996. For 16 years, they were debating that can we also use for e-commerce purposes. So then ICANN passed a model law on e-commerce in 1996, and then all the member countries were required to make a law of their own country as a sui generis system or as a model law, depending on the ICANN, to have the cyber law. So in 1996, this ministry, it was given to Government of India, because India was a signatory. So Government of India given this assignment to Ministry of Commerce. So can you define, can you make a law for the e-commerce? Because at that time, the whole idea was that can we use the cyberspace for e-commerce purposes? So then the Ministry of Commerce was trying to make a law because they were not competent. So they have shifted to Ministry of IT. So Ministry of then IT, actually they have given a kind of a proposal to make an Indian IT Act, and then on 17th June 2000, it was passed by the Parliament, and then it was sent to the President of India for kind of the assent. And on 17th October 2000, for the first time in India, the birth of cyber law taken place. So it was implemented. So our cyber law, actually, what was our IT Act? It is the whole idea of IT Act is that to provide a level playing field for e-commerce. So if you see and read the IT Act, it is more talking about that digital signature, the payment mechanism, the processes, e-contract. It is more concerned about that how to provide India as a level playing field for e-commerce, even globally, because ICANN approach was that e-commerce. That's why then, because the entire focus was how to provide level playing field for e-commerce. So, but instead of e-commerce, people were started using for different kind of purposes, and that's why the law was amended in 2008 which came into force 2009, we made around 17-18 changes in the IT Act, and then a lot of changes were made, because in the old Act there is no reference of the kind of the IPR in the cyberspace, or no reference regarding this privacy, no reference regarding this kind of the pornography, this and that. So a lot of things were there, and it was amended. So after 2009, there is no serious amendment till now, because the proposal was that when internet came in India, because it was one more medium for communication, and already we had a law we have Wireless Telegraphy Act, we have the Telegraph Act 1885, we have the Telecom Regulation Act of 1995. So already we have 5 laws, and one more law came into force, that was IT Act, just to provide a level playing field for e-commerce. So ultimately, if you see, internet is a convergence medium, because it is able to provide all the services. You can call somebody, you can see video, you can upload video, you can also publish something, you can write something. Okay, so it is providing services just like a radio, just like a television, just like the video, just like the cable television, okay, just like printing press. So in fact, this particular medium is a convergence medium, and already it is now in fact regulated by 5 different laws. So that is not the best practice. What we should do, we should have only single law, that should be a convergence law. So there was the proposal to have communication and convergence law in the country. So that's why in 2000, Government of India put a bill, that Communication Convergence Bill 2000. It was debated for 4-5 years. Ultimately in 2005, bill was scrapped because it could not take a shape of law, because it required a lot of research work, support, processes, and India could not design a law for the country in the form of convergence law. So till now, even this particular field is run by several laws. So, but the issue is that because we know that if you see the international law, that every country is sovereign, and every country can make a law for how the country will run, because you are a sovereign country. But if you see and then there is much issue regarding the governance of the internet, because what is happening now, internet is now used for every purposes. So that's why now the issue is that how to govern the internet, because private things and government thing, everything is running on the kind of the cyberspace. So earlier we have seen e-commerce, then we have seen m-commerce, now we have seen e-governance. Even some of the activities are mandatory to be done on the internet. Okay, even entire share market, okay, demat shares, entire the taxation process, GST and all, it is mostly run by the internet. So my point is that because internet has a medium, it is run by private groups and always, and also by the government groups as a e-governance. So that's why the question is that who should regulate the internet? And the fact is that it is run by a private group, ICANN. So ICANN is a body, it's a private group, it regulates the internet. So internet governance in fact is currently in the private hands. And which country? It is the USA, because it has taken birth in USA, and all the multinational companies belong to USA. And that's why this entire control of internet is in the hand of the private group, that is ICANN. So out of 17 kind of the regulations, the control on the internet, out of 13, 11 are in the hands of USA. So that's why there's a lot of debate globally that why America is ruling the internet, governing the internet, because indirectly America has maximum information about the internet, and now everything happening on the internet. That's why the lot of challenges of cyber security, cyber privacy is linked to USA. So USA is more kind of dominant country right now for any kind of cyber war or any kind of cyber threat, cyber security challenges. America can play a big role. So that's why there were a lot of debate happening that whether internet regulation should be a part of international law, or kind of how to regulate. On this point, at least India, Russia, China at one group, America is another group. So there is no kind of globally, there is no understanding, no kind of defined standards about the regulation of the internet globally as a kind of international law. So that debate is going on. Now let us come to the further development taking place, the kind of mobile technology. So side by side, we have seen the development of internet. Now we have seen the also development of the kind of a mobile technology. So in the mobile technology, very few understand what is the meaning of G. So currently we have 4G in Indian market. So 4G services are already operational in the country, but it also taken a long story that we, for the first time, we have seen the 1G phone. So 1G phone was actually, in fact, this 1G phone. 1G phone is kind of analog phone. So in 1980, for the first time, we have seen that kind of the a mobile phone. It was in the form of analog phone, calling 1G phone, or you can say wireless phone or wired phone. Then after 10 years, in the 1990, we have seen 2G phone. So 2G phone, what it has been done, the 2G phone also has a capacity of messages. So calling plus message, and also it has taken the one more leap. 1G was analog, 2G was the digital phone. Then we have seen the 3G phone in 2000. So it has calling, messaging plus internet. So now in 2000 we started seeing the video and all these things, but there were a lot of buffering was happening. If you remember your this student life, there were a lot of buffering. If you want to see some video, it will take buffering, and then after buffering, you'll be able to see. So speed was very slow. So that was 3G phone, and even for the 3G phone, the Reliance company was the market leader, because in 2005, for the first time, Reliance company has given the handsets with inbuilt 3G technology and without SIM card that anybody can use, and then they were providing very cheap price at that time, 10,000 rupees, and then the rampant kind of flow, and they were trying to capture the market. Then we have seen the 4G phone, and the 4G phone came for the first time 2010. So how the 4G phone is different from the G phone? In the 4G phone, the now buffering is not required. So you can now directly, you can log into YouTube channel, or you can directly start seeing the video. So buffering issue has gone. So that is 4G phone. Now the big challenge is the 5G phone. So 5G phone is very, very big challenge. In fact, there is a lot of fight already started in the world. Now, what is seen right now that China is going to take over the lead in technology, because it was USA, now it is China. So there was already there's two companies in China, that is ZTE and Huawei. They are going to be the market leader, and already they started 5G services in some cities in China. And these two are Chinese companies, and that's why America has banned ZTE and Huawei, because of the frustration and because of the international diplomacy. They stopped them that they cannot now market their products in USA. So what will happen in the 5G? If you see the 4G, in the 4G, we have seen the towers at the range of 7 kilometers. Towers are required to provide the services. But in the 5G phone, in the 5G, what will happen? Abhi, for example, to download a video, it takes around 5 minutes. If you want to download a 1 hour video, it will take 5 minutes to download. But if you are having the 5G services and 5G handset, it will take just 1 second. In 1 second, 1 hour video can be downloaded. It will be so fast. So it will be 100 times faster than the 4G technology. And that's why it is going to be a big change globally. And then we will be seeing the IoT, that Internet of Things. We are going to see autonomous vehicles. We will be seeing virtual reality. This is going to be the kind of the future. And then how it is going to challenge the socio-economic life, because I was saying in the 4G you require tower at 7 kilometers. In the 5G you require tower at every 250 meters. In fact, we cannot say towers. This will be kind of places that will be trying to pass the data. That is we call as that will be passing data. In fact, just like cellular towers. So every 250 meters there will be a base stations. So 5G technology, it is going to provide the 5 more technology. That is because it is the phone works on the kind of the millimeter waves. So it will be a millimeter waves, and then there will be a small cells, cellular towers at 250 meters. There will be a massive MIMO, that is a multiple input, multiple output system will be there. So because in the 4G towers we require 12 ports, in the 5G tower you require 100 ports. So 12 ports at 7 kilometers, now 100 ports at every 250 meters. So what will happen? We will be seeing, just like you see from the flights, what will happen at 250 meters, lot of base stations are there with 100 ports. So just like you can say a honeybee comb will be just like a situation. And then in that scenario, what will happen? Then in that scenario, there will be a kind of automated vehicles, virtual reality, there will be IoT. I think you understand IoT. If you have IoT set up in your house, the moment you go to your house, the door will be open. The moment you enter inside the house, all lights will be on. You will go to bedroom and then AC will be on, and AC will be on as per your temperature. If you're very hot, if you are feeling very hot, and then AC will cool more. And if you are not feeling hot, AC will be having very less high temperature. And all the lights will be also controlled by you. And if you go to your master bedroom, your TV will be on. And if you want to see channel XYZ, you said Z channel will start. So what will happen? Everything will be controlled by technology. That we get IoT, Internet of Things, and virtual reality. In that case, now the question of data will come. So because of these developments, what will happen? Lot of data will flow, because you know that if it is an autonomous driven car, that car is running without the driverless car. So how the driverless car will run? The driverless car will be talking to a lot of other cars. Will be talking to a lot of signals. So it will be running because of the signals. So in this entire process, lot of data will flow. So that's why we say that right now that data is new oil and refined data is a refined oil. So now the big game is happening of the data. So in the entire process, lot of data will flow. Now we have to regulate the data, because anybody, any criminal, any terrorist, any anti-social element, any enemy country, if they will access to these data, if they are able to control this data, they can make havocs. That's why in future there will be not a traditional war, there will be a cyber war. Okay, and already cyber war is happening indirectly between the Palestine and Israel, between India and Pakistan, between China and USA. It is in small amount is always running, but in future there will be only cyber war. In fact, you might be knowing that the India government has banned 59 applications, apps of they were Chinese apps, because these Chinese apps were collecting data and then passing data to the Chinese governments. Okay, and then Chinese government using this data as a kind of national interest and maybe misusing against some country. Okay, so that is the big issue. So if you talk about data, because if you see the copyright law, even data compilation is a copyrightable, because in copyright you require a fresh expression, new expression, original expression to get a copyright. But if you compile a data, even the softwares are copyrightable, computer programs are copyrightable, same way data are copyrightable. So even data, so some data are, because of the compilation, it will get a copyright. So anybody generating data as a matter of the original data or new compilation, he will get protection. But now the major issue is the big data. So you might have seen that if you go to currently any airport or railway stations or any big malls, if you go to Dubai, at anywhere you will get automatic public access to the internet. You just connect. But what will happen if you connect to the public kind of the internet system, this Wi-Fi, your already data is recorded somewhere. So currently globally there are a lot of big data, but for big data there is no proper system, no standards that who can access, how much to access, who can use. So that's why I will advise in advance all of you, please do not use the public Wi-Fi systems for sensitive transaction. For example, you are in a hurry and you are sitting at Delhi airport and you want to transfer your money, you open your bank account, on you're making online transaction. Please don't do, because your passwords may be hacked or it may be recorded somewhere and somebody can access you. Somebody can track you. So all the sensitive, do not open your email address. So do not do any sensitive transaction in a public place, just like the airports or railway stations or supermarkets, because it is public access and anybody can track you over the Wi-Fi and they can steal your data, and then you will be having serious challenge for your cyber security and privacy. So now the issue is that because of now data is new oil, so now there are a lot of debate started in the country, and we have seen for the first time Justice Puthuswamy case. In that case, in the Puthuswamy case, what happened? For the first time, Supreme Court of India has said that now data privacy is a fundamental right, and then we have the government has made a Justice B.N. Krishna committee, and then committee has recommended a personal data protection law. So that data is fully debated right now. It is much debated, and it has gone to very high level, and we may be able to see very shortly India oriented personal data protection law. Because if you see globally, only the European Union, they have GDPR, that is most advanced law in the world in the matter of data. Because data protection is a catch-all right now. If you see in earlier days, we used to say that any country or any company who has this iron, steel, the mine, oil, minerals, they can be the market leaders. But now what we say, those companies or those countries who have more and more data, that country or company can be the market leader. So now that's why every company, everybody is behind data. Everybody is trying to collect more and more data, and then trying to analyze the data. You might have heard that the Cambridge Analytica case, when 2 years back, during the election for the Mr. Trump in USA, this Russian government, they wanted to just control the election, and they have taken a lot of information from social media, and they have tracked those people who are in favor of Trump, and then indirectly they wanted to change their mindset, and then in that indirectly they wanted to infiltrate the election and change the election results. So this is the challenge of social media, that because of social media, they are now going to change our mindset. And same thing is done by now the RSS. Now what they have done, they have made an IT cell. So what IT cell does, the IT cell people go to social media and they track that how the people are interacting and what is their thought process, what is their ideology. And if you want to check, you just go and make a comment, go and make a serious comment, any BJP leader or any person of the RSS or any ideology of RSS, if you just make a comment, you will see that you will get immediately within a second, you will get 10 more comments to challenge you. And if you try to then argue, you will get further 100 comments, and they will start tracking you. So this way, even in India also, people are trying to change the mindset through the social media. So now the social media, earlier it was only challenge of data collection. Now it has gone to the next level because of the social media. People are trying to change your thought process. So if you are the follower of X ideology, they will try to approach you, and slowly they want to change your mindset, so you can become the follower of the ideology. So this way already we have seen the challenges over the social media, that how the social media is going to challenge our thought process. Now the question is that why we require a full-fledged data protection law, because it is not only the issue of the copyright, then it is a major issue, because of the data has the privacy issue, data has the national security issues. You might have heard that last year Government of India has given the order to all the companies who are doing e-commerce, m-commerce or online business or online transaction, and they have some payment system. They have asked in the last year May that everybody till October, they have to do a data localization. What is data localization? Because all these servers are mostly belong to the multinational companies, and their servers are in their parent country, and all the majorly the IT companies belong to USA. So almost all the servers, whether the Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all these are located in USA. So if you do any kind of chatting or transaction, anything on these medium, your data is flowing from India and going to their server. Servers are located to the foreign places, and it is stored. So what is happening? Because of this social media, sometimes we feel very happy that we are getting free accounts, but we are not getting free accounts. We are getting free accounts because of that they are able to collect your data and analyze the data. So that's why if the data will go to the foreign country is beneficiary. What they will do, they will analyze your data, infiltrate data, and they will see a trend. And because of trend, they will be trying to use for business purposes. So data analytics, in fact, data science is a very big branch is emerging in the area of the software engineering. In fact, because they do a lot of, and also the branch emerging in the area of business management, data analytics, okay, and data management, the digital marketing. All these areas are very fast growing, and people are actually taking as a kind of career option to do data analysis, because after getting the data analysis, you can be very easily trying to use it. If you see that if you anybody has any experience of publishing any advertisements in the print media, it's a very costly affair, because I've been the director in several places. I used to publish a lot of print media ads, so I understand the cost. So if you 3x3 inch ad, if you want to give to Times of India 23 editions, you know how much it cost? It will be costing around 30-40 lakh rupees. So 3x3 inch ad in 23 editions of the Times of India, it is cost is around 40 lakh rupees. And how much benefit you are getting, you are not sure, because somebody will not see the paper, somebody will be just saying for a few seconds, somebody will read and keep it here. So how much benefit you are getting, you are not sure. So the entire marketing, entire advertisement has become now the web advertising. The entire YouTube business, entire social media business is now shifted to kind of web advertising and data analysis. So all these companies, and Facebook became the one of the major business running company, major profit holder company. Its shares are gone very high. Same way YouTube is now running very strongly because of COVID-19. YouTube become very rich company, because everybody is relying on YouTube video, YouTube channels to listen to, okay, to promote. So and how they're actually earning money because of this kind of data analysis and also web advertising. So in web advertising, what is happening? You are able to get focused individual. So if I want to launch my iPhone 12 in the market, and in earlier days I have only option to publish ad in the print media. In the print media, then I have to find out the which vernacular language, which paper, which location. I'm not sure that whether my target audience I'll be getting or not, but my money will be wasted. But because in the web advertising, what will happen? I can really target those person who can be my potential customers. So how I will know? So all these Facebook, social media companies, for example, I'm a Apple and I want the potential or these customers for my Apple 12. So how they will do? They will do a lot of data analytics. Those persons, those profiles who are always talk about these latest mobile phone, always talks about the Apple phones. They always discuss about the phones, new phone and new this designs and all. So they will then collect about lakhs and lakhs of people's records, and they will be selling this particular record to Apple company. What Apple do? Apple will try to send them mails, call them, they will flow messages and all, and then the conversion rate will be very, very high and very fast promotion. Within 1 hour, Apple 12 can get thousand customers who are very target audience. This way, the kind of money saved by Apple, not giving the ads in the print media, relying on social media, they will be very easily, they can pay a lot amount of money to the Facebook or in YouTube channel, that because they got a very refined target audience, and within 1 hour they are able to promote their products. So this way the entire social media, the things are running, and how our data is utilized. Because in fact, you can ask question that how they are using our data without our permission. In fact, we have given the permission. If you are going to open any kind of social media or any site, there will always be a policy. There is always a privacy policy and a kind of the contract. So the moment you fill up your all the required information and you just going to click, they will ask, they will follow the policy, and they will, you are expected to read. But these policies are mostly in few hundred pages, and nobody has time to read those particular policies. In those policies already mentioned that their privacy policies, the data management policies, and also how they're going to use this data. It is always mentioned, but nobody is going to read. So in fact, and this is a matter of contract, you are getting free social media account. In the return that you are going to, and the company will be able to use your information, and then as a matter of the data, and they will be analyzing and using as per their requirements. So already you have given the assent, that's why they are able to use this data. but we cannot actually read those 100 pages, so we generally give the consent. But because it is not standardized right now, there is no central or international regulation that how those companies are going to provide the privacy policy and security policies. So it is depending on country to country. So recently the RBI, what the RBI has done, given a direction that because of the internet transactions, if any customer is losing certain amount of money, and this loss is because of any company or anybody, any banks who were actually using the online services with payment, and they have not maintained proper cyber security standards, and then that's why customer has lost the money. So this money will be now reimbursed by the company who has given the kind of weak security practices. But this is very lengthy process. It's not very easy. That to always the find out and file a case and approach to the banks and company and get your money returned. Uh, but I think the time has come. Now we have to think about the cyber security standards, cyber hygiene, privacy standards globally. And that's why in this line, I must appreciate the government of India has taken the lead to provide the data protection law. But in this, the current bill has a lot of challenges because the bill which was given for discussion, it was not defined that regarding the sensitive personal data. So data can be a general data can be a normal data, can be a personal data and sensitive personal data. So what is sensitive personal data? It was not defined by the government in the bill. So that's why, because the most serious challenge is sensitive personal data regarding your flavor, your religion, your attitude, and also about your the bank information, business information. So a lot of things are your passwords, your Aadhaar card number, your PAN card number. So there are a lot of things that there which can be sensitive and very personal. So how to be regulated this kind of information is very important by the government. And also there's a question was data localization. So I just mentioned that last year government has asked all the banks and the company who are doing the online business, they have to provide the data localization. What is data localization? All these multinational companies must have a data center in India. Okay. So that is also not very welcome step. I, as a person, a thinker of the cyber law and cyber security, cyber privacy, cyberspace, I am not appreciating this decision, because what will happen if you are a multinational company and your business is running in 100 countries. So currently India is saying, now China is saying, all are they saying you have to have a local data center, data localization. So what will happen? So currently multinational company are required to maintain one data center in their parent company, because controlling, managing data center, very costly affair. And if, for example, India is now said, China has said, so all the countries, if they make mandatory that now you have to maintain data center in our countries. For example, Apple. If Apple company has 100 business 100 countries, in all the 100, now they have only single data center in USA. Now all the countries, they say that please have a data center in our countries. So now they have to maintain 100 data center. So because of the 100 data center, their cost is going to be 100 times higher. So one data center make the cost 10 times higher, at least a 10% higher. So 100 data center means that the cost of Apple company is going to be very, very high. And purpose was that cyber security and privacy. Because if the data can be leaked from the central place, data can also be leaked at 100 places. So there is no guarantee of the security privacy. Okay, so my point is that instead of data localization, what we can say, we have international law that provides standards, proper regulation of cyber security and cyber privacy, and common meeting of all the countries. But the question is that who will lead this particular kind of the scenario, and who will be able to normalize and get a proper standards? Because till now, even for the cyber crime, for cyber security, cyber privacy, currently there is no international law, no international understanding. People are just trying to manage locally. So a lot of things are now required. All the international law thinkers, international law professors, and all the people and the treaty makers and all, let them come forward and have at least common understanding about the data. The data can be at the parent company's server, but how data can be used, what is the standards, how data will flow, how data will be retrieved, how data will be analyzed, because after the analysis, data becomes very, very important, and the refining process is a very costly affair. Then who are going to use? So that is business aspect. Now there is a criminal aspect, because this data may also have lot of information about the anti-social elements, terrorist groups, okay, or the defaulters of the taxes, defaulter of the various this legal rights and all. So how we are going to then utilize those data? So data localization, one of the issue is there. Second issue is regarding the data breach notifications. For data breach notifications, currently there is no law. I can cite one example. I was actually speaking on one of the very internationally famous conference, and after my lecture, I was surrounded by 3-4 officials. I was thinking, I was become kind of the fearful what would happen to me. So because they just wanted to talk to me about cyber security, and then they were actually from the top brass defense office of Government of India. You know that now even the defense system, even what is government is doing, government is trying to develop the cyber security, a separate wing of the defense services. Just like we have the Air Force, we have the military, we have the Navy. Same way, government is trying to develop a cyber security wing, a kind of a parallel wing, a vertical wing in the defense mechanism, because future is the cyber war. So we should be fully ready. So they wanted to talk to me, and before talking to me, they have all my information. During my lecture, in the short time, they have gone to my LinkedIn account, my Facebook account. They have done a lot of research about me. They are fully aware. Okay. And then in our discussion, when develop some kind of confidence and trust, so they shared me one story that actually, in fact, they have gone to the kind of deep net and dark net, and they have seen the lot of transactions. And then they were worried that how we are going to regulate those. So I'll come later on about that aspect about the deep net and dark net. So my question is that about the data breach notification, and also in our transaction, they mentioned me that in Pune there was a bank. I will not name the bank because it is a confidential information, because bank may lose the interest. So what was happening? Some of the cyber hackers, they have hacked the bank, and every hour bank was losing few lakhs of rupees every hour. And on third, so every hour bank is losing few lakhs of rupees, and banks security agency, they are not able to control, and money is just siphoning off. On third day, CIA has called the Government of India that there is a bank in Pune. That bank is attacked by the cyber hackers, and bank is losing money. What are you doing? Then government has called the bank officials, and then the government has told, why you have not told us? Because we also in Government of India, we have the this cyber emergency response team. They are always ready to help anybody, but because of the business secrets, because of this secrecy, and also because of the business interest, the bank was not telling to the government. For example, if this information was leaked to the media, what will happen? The share price in share market of that bank will fall like anything, and all the customer will become very kind of the fearful. Also, they become very upset, frustrated, that they will feel their money will be gone. So within 1, 2, 3 hours, the bank will be nowhere. Bank will become bankrupt. So just to save the bank interest, the bank was not telling this information. So ultimately, then with support of Government of India, they're able to control the server of the this particular bank, and then bank has lost 30 crore rupees in 3 days. Okay. And because there is no clear law that what is the bank responsibility, so all those customers, all those people who are linked to the bank, they were not informed by the bank, because there are a lot of data also with the bank. So one aspect is bank was losing money. Second aspect is that hacker may also trying to steal data with the bank, because all this sensitive data, because this bank may have 1000 companies accounts, all those companies balance sheet, their records, their article memorandum, all the sensitive document they may be having, and also what is their health, what is their transaction, how much money they have in their accounts. All these information may be very useful for any competing companies. Okay. So currently there is no law on breach notification. That's why the data protection law is going to provide the options. Now there will be options that if anybody will try to take any data, they have to tell that why this data is required. They have to tell that what will be the use of data and how much time it will be used. And also they will be telling for breach notifications. As per the current proposed bill, which is debated right now, it says that the when there is breach of data, within within 24 hours, the company they have to tell to the customers or data subject that your data is leaked, and we are trying level best to ensure the data. So at least the person whose data was leaked, he will be informed in time. Okay. So data breach notification, data localization, and also the purpose of collection of the data, all this will be now the process of our data protection law. We feel that shortly it is going to be implemented. So what we are talking right now, we are just talking about the ClearNet. So you know that if you see the internet has a 3 layers. So we see first layer is ClearNet, that is hardly 4%. Next layer is the deep net, and then dark net. So deep net, dark net is 96%. So what happens that once we go to internet, we mostly operate and send information, access any website, go to social media, go to Google, search any search engine. So we are just in the ClearNet area, that is hardly 4%. But so whatever I talked about the regulation part, we were talking about the 4% that ClearNet. Now there is a lot of debate happening about the regulation of the deepnet, darknet. So what is deepnet? So if you want to search anything, you go to Google. Google will be able to tell you that location, place, this and that. You can get the information. But if you go to, if anything is kept in the deepnet, unless you have the actual address, you cannot find out, because those sites which are operating on the deep net will not be linked to the URL to the Google. So Google has no access in the deep net. Google has access to only ClearNet. Okay. So now the question is that why then we have allowed the deep net? So all these sensitive government confidential information, defense information, nuclear information, all these information of these banking services, okay, all these are mostly lying in the deep net. So in the deep net, to who can access deep net? For to access the deep net, you have the actual full address, then you can go to the deep net. So all the sensitive business, trade, commerce, government, defense, nuclear energy, all these informations are kept in the deep net. So deep net is in fact is allowed and is very legal. Okay, anybody can go to deep net. Now the question is the dark net. So what happens that after the internet, because you know that I told it is started for defense, then went for research, they started the commerce, and after the commerce, now it is now multi-purpose. Okay, so all these criminals, because those who are doing the physical crime, now they have gone to cyberspace. Okay, so in the cyberspace, what happened? All these big crimes now shifted to darknet. So how darknet operates? Because darknet technology is totally different. So if you see the ClearNet operates on the technology of you can say the Google Chrome. So by the Google Chrome, all these technology you can operate the kind of ClearNet. But in the darknet, it operates on Tor browser. It's a different browser, a Tor browser, and on the Onion routing. So why we say Onion routing? Because Onion is just like a level, and then Tor is different browser. So Tor technology is legal. It is allowed by the American government, and also it is sponsored by the American government, and also it is developed by the Google only. So Tor technology is allowed. Onion browser is also allowed. But what is happening? It was in fact allowed to maintain the cyber security and privacy. In fact, why America has allowed the Tor browser? Why they are allowing this Onion routing? Because all those big businesses, confidential businesses, they wanted to allow so they can operate in a very secure and very private manner from the darknet. Because in darknet it is very anonymous place, you cannot see who are the people who are operating, what is the website. Okay, but what happened? All these criminals, they have gone to the darknet, and in fact there are more illegal things happening than the legal. Currently there is no regulation of darknet. So all the drugs mafia, all the arms dealing, all the in fact I was just reading, going through doing my research, I came to know that even anybody right now can get the COVID infected plasma from the darknet. You can purchase. So can you think if any terrorist will get the plasma, he can purchase from the darknet, and he can then, in fact, he can go and to any public meetings, he can flow. The kind of the problem he will create, can you imagine? But it's very difficult to find out. So because there is a forum shopping in the darknet, there is forum shopping. The shops are created within an hour and it is closed. Okay. But those who are people who operate, because they are always in the dark net, they understand all this kind of business. So for the first time, it came to know that you might have heard the Silk Road 1, Silk Road 2. The Silk Road 1, for the first time, it was in fact crashed by the FBI in 2014. And then for the first time in this 2011, there was a person called as a person who was actually in fact very expert in the internet technology. He was the person behind this particular development of the Silk Road 1. And then that person was actually in fact was trying very hard to develop himself by the games. He first started the games technology, this and that, but he was not successful. His name was James William Ulrich. So he was from physics background, and then he started the Silk Road 1. What he has done, he started he opened a kind of on Tor technology, on onion routing. He started a website in the darknet, and he was selling arms, ammunitions, okay, illegal documents. Even anybody can get American passport from the darknet, and that person became billionaire. It was a $1 billion business. And then he became one of the very famous global leader in the drugs selling. And then very fast in 2000, from 2011, 12 and 13, 3 years, it has expanded like anything in USA and then UK and Australia, because the data came only when FBI used to correct that system. They were able to find out that there were more than 1.5 million users. So 15 lakh users from UK, USA and Australia, they were a member of Silk Road 1, and they were actually buying and selling the drugs, arms, ammunitions and all these things. And then how actually in fact it was correct that James William Ulrich, he actually in fact got a lot amount of money, because all the business in darknet happened through the bitcoins. So he actually got a lot of bitcoins, and then he was having trouble to how to manage those bitcoins. So he has given one kind of the somewhere he published that he wanted to convert those bitcoins in dollars somewhere, and by mistake he mentioned his email address. So FBI has become very alert. FBI thought that, my God, who is this person who has so many bitcoins, and he has given the email address. So then his email address was jameswilliams@gmail.com. So FBI became very active and was started tracking. In the tracking process, and then what they have done, they have sent a mail that they want to buy the business. So it was a $1 billion business, that Silk Road 1. And then he thought, I have enough money now, let us sell this and come to the normal world. Because as per the reports, if anybody goes to the darknet and involved in this kind of business, you cannot come out. Either you will be assassinated or be murdered, or you will be arrested. You can't be, become the normal person. So, but he wanted to sell the business and come out. It was $1 billion business. So FBI, what they have proposed by anonymous names, that they want to buy the business. And then in this process, negotiation is started, and then they have tracked his location, and he was then arrested in a kind of the cyber forensic center in USA. And then after his arrest, then entire story come up. And then in 2013, it was crashed. Silk Road 1 was crashed. But within then, just after this crashing, within just next 6 weeks, then Silk Road 2 was discovered. What happened? There was Silk Road 2. Actually, how it was discovered? There were two partners, and there was a fight among two partners for sharing of the money, this and that. And then one partner, he has contacted FBI, and then indirectly, it was a Blake Benthal. So Blake Benthal was the founder of the Silk Road 1. And then because of the fight in the partnership and all, and then FBI has also able to track this Silk Road 2. And then there were several billion bitcoins and dollars were discovered from the Silk Road 2. And then after that, it is not stopped. So now what is happening? I just told you that even you can purchase the COVID-19 infected plasma from the darknet. In fact, I have the personal experience because generally it happened with me 3-4 times when I was in USA speaking for the cyber security conference 2 years back. And just after my lecture, I was surrounded 5-6 ladies and all they actually just surrounded me. And I was become very fearful. I thought I have done something wrong. So they were from FBI. And they were just trying to, because I got the best award after my paper. And they thought that this person may be having some linkages somewhere, because let us investigate this person, why he has so much knowledge in this area and why so much interested. So in fact, when we were discussing, then they realized I'm the normal person, just like a professor. It's my self-interest to promote this knowledge. I'm not having any kind of business interest, neither I'm part of any group, terrorist group, any political party. I'm a very honest, I'm very transparent, a professor. I just want to promote the knowledge. When they got the confidence, then they have shared me a lot of information. Even they told me, you know what is happening in darknet? Because FBI and our raw CBI always in the darknet. What they have seen, even you can within 1 hour you can get somebody's hand, foot, head. Okay, in 1 hour, you just pay. There will be a forum shopping. You go, and then you pay the bitcoins and whatever you want. Within 1 hour, it will be given to you. And then one person shared with me, he was from defense service. He told me, I have seen this transaction happening, that somebody wanted somebody's cut head. He wanted the you have to cut the head and bring to me of that person within 1 hour. I'll be paying this amount of money in bitcoins. And then a deal was done, because the security agency was just watching this particular transaction. And then deal was done, payment was made, and also after 1 hour, the cut head was supplied. Okay. So if the cut head, cut hand foods are supplied because of the enemy and somebody want to take revenge, then kidney transactions also happening on the darknet. You might have seen the 4-5 months back, there was a lot of kids were actually stolen from the villages and all these areas, and they found dead. So what was happening? There was a kidney racket. People were just selling, purchasing kidney over the darknet. And also what they're saying, you can find at the doorsteps, which hospital, which place, which doorsteps, you can find the drugs, you can find the cut head, food, hands, the COVID infected kind of the sample. You can get anywhere, anything. In fact, I was just reading last night, I came to know that the lot of data, you can get in fact any data on the darknet. So in fact, the data which is mostly hacked and mostly stolen, people go and sell in the darknet. Okay. So my point is that if you ask my opinion, nothing is private, nothing is secure in cyberspace. If you are on cyberspace, nothing is private and nothing is safe and secure. That's why you have to be very active and very kind of conscious. If you are doing anything in cyberspace, you must know how to have cyber hygiene. So I think cyber hygiene, that on the basic hygiene, just like our health, we are very careful that you have to take bath in the morning, you have to brush your teeth, okay, you have to have the neat and clean house. So you maintain this daily your health hygiene. Same way, now there is a cyber hygiene, because now everything is dependent on internet. So you have to have a cyber hygiene, which site you have to visit, which email account we have to access, which social media have to operate, how to manage your firewalls. I have to have at least 2-level authentication of your the passwords. So all the cyber hygiene is now very, very important for all of you, just like the daily practice of your health. So these are few of my thoughts about the privacy and cybersecurity. In fact, privacy is one of the basic requirement, because it's a fundamental right, and also is a matter of the human rights. But privacy is in fact not guaranteed on the internet, because you know that how these some apps are happening, how the social media is operating, and how these cyber hackers are doing, and what is happening in the darknet and deepnet. So in this scenario, it is very, very challenging to maintain the privacy and also maintain the cyber security. Because of the technical challenges, because of the our lack of awareness, sometimes we ourselves in fact disclose our privacy. If you go sometime on the Facebook, you will find that people are there disclosing their birthday parties, their marriage parties, their secret. They're sitting in a kind of the a hotel, they're drinking, and also they are sometimes they're capturing the bottle photo and putting on the internet which particular drinks they're taking and which amount they're taking. So this is the scenario right now. And people are actually themselves disclosing their privacy. That's why it is a big challenge right now in the internet, that how to maintain your privacy. With these few words, I want to close here, and also I'll be open to now for the question, because I see a lot of faculties participating. So I expect a lot of questions from all of you. So thank you all of you for patient hearing. Now I'm open for the questions.
Omar.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the floor is now open for questions. We have one or two questions in the chat box. So I would request Professor Meera Matthew to kindly come online and switch on the mic and then ask the question directly to Professor Tabrez. Professor Meera Matthew.
Yes, thank you so much.
Right.
I had certain questions, sir. If you could answer that, that would be really great. The first question is that, sir, you told that the internet providers are mostly registered in US. So my question is that, can we regulate if the internet providers as companies which are registered in US, but having servers outside India by the Data Protection Act? Because my question is that I agree that we have this data localization considered to be very expensive, but national regulation of the data is possible only through the Personal Data Protection Act, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, because it was not very clear earlier that they were not bound to take your consent, that why data was collected, for what purpose. They were not bound to tell you that when there is a data breach, they are not bound to have data localization. But the personal data protection law is now very clear. Now it is saying that the proposal is that anybody collecting any amount of data, they have to take the permission, consent from the person, the data subject, that can we collect your data. Okay, if you do not allow data collection, they cannot collect. Once you allow that data collection, then they will ask further question, can we use this data for these purposes? If you say yes, then they can use for that purpose. And also, if there is breach of that data, they have to come back and tell you that your data was breached and what action has been taken by the company for data maintenance. Okay. And as a national interest, now government is asking every company, they have to have data localization. Any foreign company operating in India, collecting data and also have payment system, they have to have data center in India, because in a matter of any security issues, any investigation process, government can very easily retrieve data and do analysis. And also for business purposes, government can do analysis and use as a business trend, a business purpose for the India government business processes. So once data protection law will be implemented, we are going to solve these problems.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. As a follow-up question, I have one more thing to ask. So, sir, Data Protection Act, will it lead to a sort of content regulation? Because my question is that if data is contents, it's somewhere like the user-generated data is deemed to be content. So if the contents are going to be monitored, would it be like a content regulation?
So very, very good question. Yeah. So very good question, because the relevant question is now content regulation. So currently at global level, there is no standardization about the content regulation. Only we talk the content in terms of the copyright. So if you go to television, if you see anybody is actually our time, when I recall my 80s, there was the black and white TV, and we used to have actually weekly Chitrahar, and also weekly one film was telecasted on the television. Then what happened? Now today there are those dedicated channels for music, for the film, for news, okay, for research. So their dedicated channels are there. Even today, each channel may not have 24-hour data. So what is happening? Hardly any channel has 8-hour data. They will show 3 times. Okay, so same data has been shown 3 times, or 8-hour, 8-hour, 8-hour. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So, and then that particular the content they are showing, sometimes those contents are pirated content. Those contents may not be taken with proper license, proper approval from the person who has the copyright. Okay. So then also if you talk about the content regulation, there is a copyright issues that the whatever is shown on television, then whether the television authority, the channel has authority to showcase particular information, particular content or not, whether that content has crossed the time period of the kind of the copyrights. Because if you talk about the copyrights, if it is copyright a person, it has life plus 60 years. If copyright belong to a kind of a artificial person, it is only 60 years. Okay, and in that case, even if it has crossed the copyright period, you have to also mention the name. For example, all the Rabindranath Tagore's work has crossed the copyright period, because after his death already we have passed 60 years. Okay, it doesn't mean that anybody can misuse the works of the Rabindranath Tagore in any manner without quoting. So only commercial rights expires, but moral rights will always carry forward. So generally all the people who are using any content, if even it has crossed the copyright period, they have to mention the name of the person who has the original copyright, who is the author. There's difference in author and owner. Somebody can become the owner, but author will always an author, because he will be having the moral rights. His name will always come. So that's why there are a lot of challenges for content regulation. So one aspect is copyright aspect, IPR aspect. Other aspect is other national security aspect, privacy aspect. These aspects are also there. So if you talk about the big data, big data is a big content. So big data, for big data analysis, who can access? Because currently anybody can access the big data. Okay, and it can also be taken by a terrorist group or maybe anti-social group. They are only extracting the private information, personal information. They're making a kind of some system to have some future kind of crimes. Okay, because if you talk about me, that if my actually knowledge and experience about the internet crimes or cyber crimes, it is not momentary. It is very pre-planned crimes. Okay, so somebody will try to follow you, do stalking, follow you social media, collect information, then he will do a pre-planned, well-structured kind of crime against you. Okay, so that's why the content regulation, I'm very happy you asked this question. So content regulation is very big problem, because generally we feel content regulation as a copyright issue, but currently it is not only copyright issue. It is a major issue of cyber security and also privacy, because somebody could make a base to do a very big crime in future, because somebody can target you directly at your location. If somebody in fact, right now we are vulnerable, you and me, because any cyber criminal can easily find our location right now, because we are online, and there may be any crime happen to us right now, because we are online, anybody can track us. So that's why content regulation, content standards are very, very important issue right now. And once we have IoT, once we have this virtual reality, once we are going to have the 5G technologies, there will be more and more challenges, because the data will flow like anything every time, and we are more vulnerable. That's why data regulation, content regulation will be more challenge in future.
Thank you, sir. I'm so sorry. I have one more question to ask, if I may be permitted to do so.
Yeah.
Sir,
Please
Meera, quickly, please. Yes.
Thank you, sir. So, sir, content regulation is a challenge, and already India has not passed the Personal Data Protection Act. So, my next question to this is that end-to-end encryption. We have this policy, like if you see Facebook and WhatsApp already in the sub judice matter in the Supreme Court, they said that once the end-to-end encryption mode is on, they won't be able to do the content back to the government and submit it. So, my question, my apprehension is that On one hand, we need to protect the data for which we are encrypting. On the other hand, once it is encrypted, it's very difficult to decrypt and give it. So what is a way out to solve this issue according to you?
No, I think end-to-end encryption is best technology because the WhatsApp has end-to-end encryption. Okay. And then what was, you might have heard that Zoom also have a case in Supreme Court of India. Somebody filed a case against Zoom because what was Zoom was doing, Zoom was not very secure and Zoom has not end-to-end encryption. It means that third party can anytime enter and see what is happening. In end-to-end encryption between these two parties, third party cannot enter. Okay, because there's no intermediate, no server is there, nobody you can see what is happening. And Zoom was missing this particular aspect because they do not have the end-to-end encryption. So third party always scope to enter. That's why even I have seen a lot of my faculty actually complained me that during their lectures, somebody entered in the classroom and shown some these unwanted pictures, unwanted videos, and make some sound. In fact, the government of India has shown that even the HRD minister was taking a meeting and somebody has actually entered in the room and recorded, taken some of the very confidential meeting was going on. They have taken, even Prime Minister's meeting was somebody entered. Even the Prime Minister of UK, he was having a meeting and somebody entered through Zoom. So then one issue is that end-to-end encryption. Second issue is that because in the end-to-end encryption, there may be possibility of that these two persons are talking something against the country. They are going to plan something very, very serious against the national security or global security. That's why we should have some mechanism that if any kind of doubt is there, the security agency should have access to these transactions, these data, and do analysis. So if anything happening against the interest of the country, it can be tracked. Because you know that even for the want of national security, fundamental rights can be had and fired. If you see 19 class 2 and 19 Article 21 and 14, if you see all the combinations. So national security is the prime interest. Anybody, if you're doing something, his fundamental rights, personal liberty can be violated. It can be hired and fired because we have major interest. So that's why all this technology, if you are going to have very strong encryption, it has further challenges. You might have heard the BlackBerry case. Once upon a time, the BlackBerry phone was a hot cake. You know why? Because it was most safe and secure, and server was in USA. It was very difficult for a hacker, cyber criminal to track the data in the BlackBerry phones because BlackBerry phones were most secure phone. For the first time, one case was happened, and Government of India approached the BlackBerry. Please share the data. The BlackBerry refused because they said that we are not bound to disclose the information because our business interest is that we are known in the market. We became so famous because all business, topmost business groups, they take our services because they feel confident that their data is safe and data is lying in the this USA. So then after that, what Government of India was trying to that, they wanted to hack the phone. The phone was captured and the phone was having some phishing information about some national security interest. But our police was not able to hack the BlackBerry phone because it was having 256 this bit encryption, and 256 bit encryption is one of the very, very powerful encryption. It is difficult to hack. Even on this point, there is a lot of diplomacy at global level. Globally, there is a kind of regulation that all the mobile companies, they should not make very high powered kind of secure encrypted phone, because if by those phones, if any crimes are committed, any terrorists will do some operations, and if the phone was captured, how the security agencies are going to hack that phone? Because if you cannot hack the phone and entire data is in the phone, if you destroy the phone, you will be not getting the information because entire evidence are in the phone, because the server has the data, but the evidence will be in the phone. Okay, so you have to match the timing, this content in the phone and in the server. So my question is that even sometime we as a security agencies, as a policymaker, even Government of India has said that let us and directed all the mobile phones, please do not make very safe, secure and highly encrypted phone, because we will be having challenge to track and crack those phones. And then in that, what will happen then? It means that all the police stations required a kind of the software engineers that they'll be sitting in the police station, because any mobile and this laptop is tracked. and that was used for the crime, they have to do cracking. And it is not very easy. You know, the highly paid software engineers are topmost hackers. They are highly paid. So white hat hackers, ethical hackers are highly paid engineers in the world, because any company launching any software programs, security programs, they'll be tested by the white hat hackers or ethical hackers. If they cannot hack the system, then that program is foolproof. Or if they can hack, the company has further scope to further improve. So my point is that sometimes we as a policy not able to provide very secure and very foolproof system because of the security agencies challenges.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Before I move ahead with the next question, I would particularly like to acknowledge the presence of two senior members over here. Professor Subir Kumar Bhatnagar from National Law University, Lucknow, the Vice Chancellor, and Professor Preeti Saxena, again from Lucknow, Ambedkar University, Dean HOD in the Human Rights Department. So I would particularly like to acknowledge the presence of these esteemed members over here.
Very good afternoon to both the professors from my side. It's my privilege that I'm able to speak in front of them.
Right. So Professor Preeti has a question that what are the specific challenges of cybersecurity during the pandemic era? So if you can reflect upon that.
Okay. So what happened? After the pandemic, we have shifted to the entire business, entire work from home, teaching from home. So what happened? Because if you see, and they talk about the security system, all the top class companies, they have the VPN technology. That VPN is one of the very safe and secure technology. But generally, what happened if you operate from your house, you are operating from maybe Jio or Airtel. Okay, some of the the browsers. So in this, what happened? People are using the same system for business as well as personal and for leisure. So if you use your computer in the office for only office purposes, so office, they have very strong security system, firewalls, updated antivirus system, and they are very always active that if any attack is happening, something fishy happening in the system, they can control. But what happened? People shifted to their house and using their personal computer for their leisure. They're going to social media, they're going to call somebody, their personal meeting, and also using the same system for official purposes, for taking the classes. So in this process, what happened? The cyber criminals, they are able to track data very easily, and they can track you very easily. You may not have very updated antivirus. Okay, you not have taken cyber hygiene. You are sometime we log in directly from our Google account to the Zoom account or Google Meet or Software Meet. So I suggest all of you to always keep separate your official accounts, personal accounts. So do not use your official account for personal purposes, neither personal thing you use for official purposes. And based with that, you should have two separate systems altogether. If you have two laptops, I'll suggest you use one laptop for your personal purposes, use other laptop for the official purposes for safety and security reasons. And the second point is that all those criminals who are actually doing the offline crimes now, because of pandemic, there is no crime, nobody in the street, what they will do? Everybody in the house. So what they have done, they have now came to cyberspace and they are trying to do cyber crimes. So even cyber crime rates are more than 3 times, and in China is more than 4 times. Okay, so cyber crimes rate has gone higher because we are not able to maintain our cyber hygienes, and all those criminals who are doing the offline crimes, they came on the online crimes, they become cyber criminals, and the earlier criminals, they are able to access more data, and now they got more clients available already on the internet. Always we are operating. So that's why the cyber crime rates become very, very high. It has gone more than 3 times globally. And also there is no use of VPN technology by the private groups, because VPN technology is very, very costly affair. A personal person cannot actually sustain from their pocket. Mostly it is company that they take the VPN technology. That's why these cyber crimes have become very higher in the pandemic situation. And we have to take cyber hygiene always to take two-sector authentication. You use more firewalls and always do not use personal thing in the your passwords, your child's name, your date of birth, your village name, this and that. Always use very, very kind of multiple your letter and then kind of the some symbol, alphabet, a lot of makes a long passwords. So and also go on updating every 3-4 times. Do not use any transaction on the public place like you are in the a mall or airport or in the railway station. If you use Wi-Fi, do not use public Wi-Fi. Sometimes some of the good apartments, they have apartment Wi-Fi, and if you connect to the apartment Wi-Fi, anybody can easily track you. So always try to use your personal kind of the accounts and use the proper passwords, use the proper cyber hygiene, and always go on changing the passwords. This way, I think you can be more safer and secure than in the normal medium.
All right, thank you. If any other member has any question, kindly ask it, and after that, perhaps we will close. Any other question? All right.
So I think, Umar, I think one thing is left out regarding blockchain technology. So because I could not mention the blockchain. So we were talking about this Bitcoin. So Bitcoins, in fact, is the kind of blockchain, Bitcoin, both are interconnected. For the first time, we have seen 1991, somebody has written about the blockchain in the 2008, somebody published a white paper on blockchain. So because blockchain is the new way of the, because blockchain is a distributed ledger system where things will be fully decentralized, but controlled properly. For example, what I see the pandemic is a very real condition, just like blockchain model. What is happening today? All of us, all of you participating in this webinar, all are actually sitting at different locations, but we are talking and we are controlled by at one place. So this is surely kind of a real ideal condition of the blockchain. So blockchain technology is the new way of life. This is a new normal in coming days. Because if you use the blockchain technology in the IPR issues, if you use the blockchain in the transaction of the land records, if you use blockchain in the hospitals, then you can very easily regulate the system. So my point is that all of you must read about the blockchain technology, also read about the artificial intelligence, because now everything is governed and controlled by the artificial intelligence. So now the question is that whether the AI, the artificial intelligence, should be given the protection as an IPR, because even we have seen a lot of the AIs are able to create a lot of innovative technologies, innovative processes. So can they hold the IPR? Because current law says that only a person will be able to hold the IPR, because a kind of a machine is not holding IPR right now, because Indian law, UK law, all the law says. But the way the AIs are becoming intelligent because of machine learning, in future we have to think that can we give IPR to the machines. We have seen the chimpanzee case, whether the photographer was in the jungle, one chimpanzee came, taken the camera, clicked a lot of photographs, and the issue was that whether the photograph will be right will be given to the camera man or to the chimpanzee. So my point is that the blockchain technology and artificial intelligence and 5G technology, these three are coming big way in the market, and this will be a new normal after 5-10 years. This will be the very challenging area for all the legal thinkers, regulatory agencies, and because this will be the reality and we have to go with them, live with them. That's why please think, write, discuss about these technologies and try to see how it is going to challenge our business processes, IPR, our this privacy and also security challenges. So thank you, all of you.
Thank you, sir. And it was an immensely learning experience to hear you for on the topic of cybersecurity. I would request Dr. Vishnu to deliver the formal vote of thanks to Professor Tabriz. Thank you, sir.
So thank you so much, Professor Tabriz Ahmed. And it's the knowledge was immense. You have started from the history of the internet, how it evolved. Then your lecture had a solid foundation on your technological expertise, and then you went on to the challenges that we face as an internet user, as a legal academic, as a policy maker, on when we interact with the internet and cyberspace. You went into the different kinds of internet, which is like not known to most of us, the legal academics, like the ClearNet or DeepNet and DarkNet. Then you have explained about blockchain technology. You have discussed about data protection and the aspects of encryption. It has been a fantastic 2 hours spent on the Independence Day. Thank you so much for the accepting our invitation, and we will upload this video on our YouTube channel, as well as we'll share it with you. And maybe if there are more comments, we would request you to respond to those comments in our Facebook group or in our YouTube group, YouTube channel. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Subir Bhatnagar sir, Preeti ma'am, and Meera Matthew, and Megha, and all the participants. Thank you.
So thank you, Vishnu and Umar, for giving me a chance to address all the faculties of law. A rare chance for me, and also a very I'm fortunate to have the senior persons like the Vice Chancellor of NLU Lucknow, and also other senior persons who are participating in the program. So very great experience, great learning for me also, and also matter of great proud and honor for me to address the very intelligent and intellectual gathering of the law faculties. So thank you, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.